Welcome back. Okay, we're now on to the claims of ISS as to what my conduct was. So the basis is this. Since about October 2007, the defendant, Troy Agate, had engaged in a concerted course of hostile and damaging conduct adverse to ISS, including Mr. Agate has written a series of letters to ISS security. Now those letters were applying for information, telling them that they were wrong in what they were doing to me and seeking further information to challenge their claims. To ISS security solicitors, because they had a private investigator looking out after me, so I wanted to know their name, because at the time I was doing protection of the Prime Minister in Brisbane, and it was in conflict with what my role was. BACL, to advise them of what the BACL is, Brisbane Airport Corporation, to advise them what was going on. They need to maintain any footage that ISS is requesting of me. The Australian Federal Police, to advise them of what was happening, because they were my employer, they needed to know, and to other authorities. I wrote to about every politician that was sitting in Parliament at the time, and to airport security, investigations, and the list is long as to who I wrote to. I wrote to every authority that had anything to do with airport security and policing. I also made a number of statements about ISS business to a reporter from the Courier Mail, which was, that's true, I blew the whistle. Those made the first 3 pages of the Courier Mail, which hadn't been done in like 13 years, so it was pretty important what I had to say. They were republished in various articles published by the Courier Mail, and that went worldwide, right up through the air industry and overseas. Everybody got a copy of it. It was huge news from what I came out and said. And I didn't do it alone. I had several ISS staff members who were being targeted by ISS at the time also come out and back up the statements. And I also published a website on Free Webs. ISS tried to have it taken down, but I challenged Free Webs and said they had the court order saying I can talk, and with that order they put the website back up. I'd obtained copies of documents belonging to ISS security and relating to internal operations, and has threatened to obtain and disclose publicly all ISS contracts in Australia. Now, I did say that. However, the contracts and requesting the contracts and making them public was never my target. There is an very old saying, just because you shoot high and right doesn't mean you missed your target. It just means I wasn't aiming for you. And that's the tactic I used here. You've got to confuse your enemy. In this case it was ISS. You've got to confuse them so that they disclose information to you unwillingly, but they do it by their own admission. So although they give me information that they weren't meant to give me, e.g. this book, it is done because they are so flustered, and because they're so flustered they're not thinking. Hence I got a copy of the book. So when you are challenging a corporation of such size and magnitude, they're all over the world, this company. They have millions of employees. They're just massive company. They have more money than I will ever see in 1 year, let alone in my lifetime. So you are taking on someone who could send you broke in days and still never see the inside of a courtroom. So to get someone like this to court, you've got to be a little bit different in your tactics. You can't just tell them to take you to court. I told them, 50 or 60 times, take me to court. I'd love to have my voice heard, but every time they just ignored it. Took a lot of persuasion for this company to spend the money to put me in court. So this is the statement from Peter Beadle. He believes that I had engaged in contact with the purpose of intentionally to interfere with ISS security contractual relations with Backle and assure ISS's and injure ISS's trade and business. Mr. Beadle, you are absolutely correct. And I warned you. And I warned the CEO, Charles Blinkworth, the same. And Charles Blinkworth, when I told him what my plans were, responded with, "Go your hardest, little man." Now, we'll get to Charles Blinkworth later on, but remember that name. Now, another saying that you need to remember when you're doing things like this, and the sayings, they seem irrelevant, but they're most important, because when you're taking on an enemy of this size, you must remember, never incite your enemies. So by him telling me to go my hardest, little man, well, I'm being friendly and negotiable, saying, look, just cut it out. They incited me. They gave me passion to fight. As much as they were trying to demoralise me through this whole thing, they gave me passion to keep going. That has its own effects. We'll get to that later. So, he believes the actions are intentioned to damage the reputation in the marketplace and in the public arena, destroying public confidence. Well, if the public knew a third of what I know what this company was like as a security operator, then the public's interest is at high risk. Very high risk. So it's better they stay out of the security market. My belief is based on statements made by Mr. Aggett in correspondence to ISS security solicitors and third parties and the AFP and other authorities. That's right, other authorities. I wrote to everybody who was relevant to the case. I let everybody know I wasn't dropping the ball on this one. It's important. I found it to be very important. If you're going to try and cover up crimes, someone needs to be the one to stand up and take the bullet. That someone was me. And other conduct Mr. Aggett is detailed below. I have now come to the view, unless restrained by the court, Mr. Aggett will continue his course of conduct and cause irreparable damage to ISS. Now, even in this book, he states Mr. Aggett was formerly employed as a protective service officer with the AFP, where he was based at Brisbane International Terminal. Now, this is the evidence they supplied to the courts, but here's a tip. The judge doesn't read it. I didn't know that. I thought when you supplied documents to a court, the judge reads the documents, but he doesn't. In fact, he doesn't read them until it's relevant for him to read. So, walking in there, I believed the judge knew what the case was and had read the information. But when you look in hindsight, some of these cases have 4 or 5 suitcases attached to it, and you can understand why a judge doesn't read all the information unless it becomes relevant. So the idea that you walk into a courtroom and look at a judge and he knows what your case is a mistake. He doesn't. And this is the problem when you use lawyers. If you go and get a lawyer to fight your case, then the lawyer's only going to say what he thinks is relevant, not what you think is relevant, because he doesn't want to take up too much of the judge's time. So while prosecution goes into great depth, your defence lawyer usually doesn't. In fact, they'll come up with a couple of excuses of why you did things, but they won't fight your case like you can. You've just got to have the confidence to do it. And to get the confidence, no matter how scared you are, no matter how much you think this is a bad mistake, no matter how much of a minefield this is going to be for you to walk through, it's actually not as complicated as you think. Because if you're served with documents way down in the bottom corner in very, very tiny writing, it tells you the document to respond with. It's a fact. When you're served with documents in very fine writing, it tells you to respond to this document, you need to fill out an R15, 16, 17, whatever the document number is. And it also tells you a notice of disclosure, a notice of, what was it, a notice of disclosure. There was a notice of, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to come back to you on those ones. I can't remember what they were. There's 3 things you have to do when you respond to a claim against you. Notice of defence, then a defence, and then a counterclaim. And those 3 numbers are written on the bottom of the document that you're served by the sheriff. See you in the next part. We'll get further into detail soon. Thank you for listening. If you want to share these links, that would be great. I think people need to learn, people need to know. It's a bigger world out there, and I think these conversations will certainly need to be heard and shared. Talk soon.